Cheryl, what were you giving away this morning?
Lettuce.
Ooh, I think they're
Starting
all
with-
gone by the time I got there.
I know, it went fast. I had 13 1-gallon bags that I cleaned and packed up and
Oh my gosh.
took the slugs off. Hopefully I got them all.
Well,
But,
for the price,
well,
nobody can complain.
it was looking like it was gonna bolt. Yeah, the price was good. It was
Yeah.
looking like it was gonna bolt, and you know how it turns really bitter
Yeah.
after it does that. So we had all, and trust me, we've eaten enough lettuce, so I didn't give away anything that. And you can't do anything with it, right?
Yeah.
Can't pack it, can't can it, you can't
No.
store it. It just goes bad. You can compost it, but I figured other people could use it more than
Good,
me.
good thinking. Good for you.
Yep. And then I did have a guy stop and ask if the table was free.
I thought it was the cooler at first.
Please, yeah. John was afraid of that too. Please don't take my table or the cooler. But yeah, it was all gone. So all you have to do is put the word out
All right, I'll remember that.
if you want to get rid of anything.
I don't want to clean it all though.
Well, I just did it with a hose.
Oh.
I just laid it out, just kind of sprayed it down. But I warned people. I said, please, please look for, tag along critters. I'm not pulling them all off there.
Yeah.
Okay, come on. Yep. Uh-oh, there we go. Is your garden all in, Tom?
Pretty much, yeah. It's awful dry.
It is very dry. I know. I'm always hoping for rain. Like
Yeah.
now, kind of thinking it'd be nice if it rains.
Got some clouds, but I don't think it'll rain.
No, I know.
Well, it looks like it's 5 o'clock, everybody. We might as well get
Great.
started. Well, welcome to the Community Development Committee meeting. See who's present here. Councillor Perry, Councillor Robinson, Councillor Wingard, Councillor Mitchell. Councillor Gardner will be joining us later, so she'll pop in. Just be aware that she'll be showing up. First things first, I ask that we all be respectful of time. We got a lot of items on this agenda tonight, which probably will go pretty lengthy. And ask your questions, but please be aware of other people within the group to let them get their opportunity also. Our beloved town manager is doing 2 roles tonight, filling in for Belle, so let's be patient with her because we know how technology is.
Oh my goodness.
So let's just jump right in for the first item, which is minor change to the mobile food vendors ordinance. Oh, and Councillor Osher just showed up here also.
Ooh,
Hi.
wow.
So Sophie, who's going to be talking on this one?
This is Kyle, and he should be all set to just pop up on screen.
Yes. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Kyle.
So a while back, we amended the ordinance to create a use for mobile food vendors. And, after having a few go through, I think in general, it's working well. But I've had some conversations with, some people at the university, over the past year or so, maybe, just about, things with food trucks that they're considering in the future. And, when it started, making me think a little bit and look at the way the ordinance was and the process that would be involved if, there was a time when multiple trucks had to come either, on any sort of regular basis on campus, what that would mean and what that review would be like. So I was looking at the land use, sort of the table of land uses existing in the ordinance. And, there's a lot of things that are in the university district that in other districts might require site plan review, but in the university district, they only require a permit. So when we were crafting the ordinance for mobile food vendors, we were comparing it a lot to restaurants. You know, if a food truck was going to operate in one place on a consistent, regular basis, then, you know, we should treat it more as like an accessory restaurant almost to whatever the primary use was. But when you look at our land use table, restaurants, for instance, in the university district, only require a permit, whereas elsewhere in town, they require planning board review. And that's, you know, because a big part of site plan review is the impact that you're creating on the surrounding area and on abutters. But for the university, you know, there really is not that much chance for impact on abutters there, especially if something is taking place sort of on campus. So what we're proposing is just a small amendment that would make a mobile food vendor 2, which are the ones that are operating on more of a regular, frequent basis in the university district. It would sort of depend on the situation, whether it called for a permit through code office or planning board review. And either way, the food truck or mobile food vendor would still have to meet all of the standards of the ordinance, and they would still have to get a victualer's license through the town. But if it was, you know, we added this C under permitting that would include an exemption. So any mobile food vendor 2 that was hosted by the university for an event or purpose done by the University of Maine, and it was taking place on campus or on a university-owned lot in the university district, they would only have to obtain a permit. So if they were to have food trucks come on a regular basis, kind of throughout the semester, instead of having multiple trucks all have to go to the planning board and the planning board reviewing basically the same project multiple times, it would be a much more efficient and easier process, and probably not have too much of a difference in impact on the surrounding area. So that's pretty much it. Open to any questions.
Anybody have questions for Kyle?
I just
Sarah?
have one. Kyle, what is did the University of Maine give you like a reason for this increase in mobile food vendors? Does it have to do with the virus at all? I mean, is there a reason why they've increased that?
No, they've been in contact about what our standards are and permitting process for having food trucks a few different times in the past year or two.
Mhm.
So I don't think it was, if anything, the pandemic had put a halt on it. You know, I had discussions a while back, and it, you know, came up somewhat recently. And I think, you know, for now, any plans that they have can probably be met pretty easily by our current ordinance, but it seemed like something worth exploring in the future if they do want to expand and have more on campus. It would just be, it made sense when I was comparing it to other similar land uses also allowed in the university district.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kyle.
Yep.
Any other questions? Seems pretty
Sounds like-
straightforward, Kyle.
Yeah, it sounds like a very reasonable amendment, and I'd support it.
Great. Thank you, Kyle.
Thanks.
So let's move on to the next item, which is number 3, proposed marijuana ordinance revision. And I believe everybody got a copy. Go ahead, Sophie.
Can I just go back to clarify to make sure that staff has what we need? Are you good with this being referred to the planning board?
I think we are, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
So again, I think we all received the PowerPoint presentation to kind of get us a little, not everybody. Okay, I got a copy of it, but we're going to just talk about the marijuana ordinance revision now. And Sophie, who does that go to? Kyle again?
Kyle.
Okay, we'll share my screen for this one. Can everyone see the presentation? Okay. So the point of this presentation is mainly to talk about the issue, why we have the moratorium currently in place for marijuana retail stores in the commercial 2 area along Park Street. If you remember, we put that moratorium in place because we had some issues with the way the setback language was worded from between marijuana retail stores and different uses that we identified in the ordinance needing buffers from. But sort of in the couple months, post marijuana adoption of the ordinance, there's been a few other things that have come up that I think were worth bringing up that either just weren't considered during the draft process when we were originally creating the ordinance that might be worth looking into and getting some feedback on. So this is really, I have a series of kind of questions at different points throughout this presentation where I'm looking for council feedback, and I'll be providing a few different alternatives each time to hopefully get an idea of how, if at all, we might make some small changes here and there to the existing ordinance language that I could bring back at a future committee meeting. So first, talking about the moratorium issue. So our existing setback standards, and when I'm talking about setbacks here, I'm talking about the distance needed between a potential marijuana retail store and one of the kind of sensitive uses that we identified in the ordinance. So the ordinance, requires a retail store to be 1,000 feet away from schools and childcare facilities and 500 feet away from any place of worship, the university, or other marijuana retail stores. So in general, our setbacks, the way they're measured would be in a straight line from property line to property line. However, we did put in an exemption in the ordinance for kind of larger scale lots with either shopping centers or multiple, kind of principal structures or buildings on one lot. And the intent with that was, when you're looking at commercial lots, where you have commercial subdivisions or shopping centers like Owl and Stillwater, that there's a lot of unused potential space on those lots, and you wouldn't necessarily want to, keep that land on those lots from counting towards the setback. Shopping centers might have, a couple 100 feet of parking area where the use that you're trying to, make the setback from is kind of tucked, far back on the lot. So that was the purpose of that exemption. But as we'll see, it did have some kind of unintended consequences. So this is a aerial screenshot of the Park Street corridor and the C2 district. So anything in that kind of red color is the commercial 2 district. And I've just marked in here each lot, whether a marijuana retail store would be allowed or not allowed based on the setback requirements. So I have a pointer on here. Oh, not sure. Okay. Well, anyway, the top blue dot is a child care facility, and the blue dot near Washburn Place there is the Islamic Center, which would be a place of worship. So, and then, along the kind of northwest side of the image there, you have the university property line. So those would be the 3 things to consider here. But if we just kind of go off of the Islamic Center and the existing child care facility there, you can see that all of the lots with red dots would be lots where marijuana retail stores would not be allowed because they fall within those setbacks that we talked about last time. So, as you go north along Park Street, more towards Old Town, there's really only a couple of lots there at the end that would be eligible, one of them being the reserve, and the other two are developed as well. So, not a whole lot of opportunities. However, if you look on the other end of the image, near the roundabout and Rangeley Road, you'll notice that there are some opportunities there, which wasn't necessarily the original intention of the ordinance, and that's what we'll get into on the next slide. So as we talked about before, there's a setback from the university property line of 500 feet. However, that exemption that we were talking about, where multiple buildings all on the same lot, instead of measuring property line to property line, you would measure to the nearest building instead. So although not really intended to apply to the university, I don't think when we got a legal opinion from the town attorney, we realized that yes, the university would meet that exemption, which sort of leads you back to the situation here, where a number of lots around the university entrance by Rangeley Road would be eligible to have marijuana retail stores, which was sort of, the opposite of the intention when council, I think, was drafting or, giving feedback on the draft ordinance during that process. So the issue, this makes one of the only allowable areas along Park Street for marijuana retail stores, the area around Rangeley Road, originally intended to be avoided. So the big question, that comes around the moratorium then is, how should the university setback language be amended to meet the intention? And I think there are a couple of ways. The first way is to have a setback only from university entrances. So in this case, specifically the Rangeley Road entrance, or, right, that area around the roundabout. Instead of doing a setback from the entire property line, if the intention is to not allow marijuana stores, kind of right in that visible, area around, where people are entering campus, then this could work. And what it would do is it wouldn't impact lots further down Park Street as you're approaching the town line and you're getting kind of more so out of town. And, if we go back to the map real quick. So for instance, if you created a 1,000-foot setback from the roundabout, you would basically not allow marijuana stores between Crosby Place or Crosby Street and Washburn Place. So, all of those lots with the green dots around the university entrance would no longer be allowed. And, that number is certainly up for discussion if that was the way that we wanted to go. But it would really depend on what the intention is of the council, like how much area around the university entrance you'd want to not allow marijuana retail stores. The second alternative would be to keep the setback from the campus property line, if that is the intention, to have a setback from the entire campus, whether it's an entrance or, the property line backing up to a wooded area, whatever it is, and get rid of the exemption. So that exemption no longer applies, and that you would measure from the property line of the university. And in that case, the result of that would be most, if not all, lots along Park Street would be ineligible for marijuana retail stores. The university property line runs pretty much the extent of Park Street behind the C2. So between that setback and the existing childcare facility and place of worship setbacks, you would basically make it impossible for a marijuana retail store to operate on any lot on Park Street. So if this is the way that council would want to go, it may be worth, in that instance, simply not allowing marijuana retail stores as an allowable land use in the commercial 2 at all, because it wouldn't be feasible anyway. And it might be confusing for people if they see that, well, marijuana retail stores are allowed in the C2, but in actuality, there's nowhere that you could actually put one. So I think this is the first point where I'd ask for some feedback and like to hear the direction that people might be leaning.
So I'm gonna scroll through people's, I don't see everybody's face. Laura, okay, hi Laura. Would you like to speak?
Yeah, I had a question about the definition of an entrance in alternative 1. So Rangeley Road is the entrance, but that is primarily a car entrance, and there's a bicycle walking entrance further down Park Street. So why is that not considered an entrance?
It could be. I was thinking the initial intention, as I kind of heard it when the ordinance was being crafted, I thought of it more as the main entrances to campus. So the Rangeley Road one seemed like the primary one, as well as some of the entrances on College Ave. But since marijuana retail stores aren't allowed anywhere near the College Ave side of things, it's less of a focus in this presentation. But yeah, that's not being said that this is not a formal ordinance language or proposed definition. It was more so just an example. So if council did want to pursue setbacks from all entrances, whether they be motor vehicles or walk and bike ped paths or whatever they might be, that's something that can be done.
I have a question.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Kyle, can you put your slide back up again, your thing back up, and go back to the dots?
Sure.
The green dots and the red dots.
1 second. Okay.
So the 3 dots, and you can't see my pointer, but the 3 dots at the end of Park Street, right?
Mm-hmm.
Past the red ones.
Yes.
Would those ones, if we decided not to do the C2, would those ones also be eliminated?
Correct. Yeah. If you, this whole area is zoned as commercial too. So
Right.
if the intention was to just not allow marijuana stores in the C2, then
Right.
really the only area where they'd be allowed is the commercial one along Stillwater.
Okay. And there's already, that's where the that's all developed already, correct?
Yeah, it is. It's mostly developed. I mean, most of Park Street, most of the lots are
Right.
developed. There are really only 1 or 2 lots that are completely
Okay.
undeveloped. However, I mean, there's always opportunities for change
Right.
of uses and things like that. So.
Mm-hmm. And further up Park Street, I think I'm thinking more along where the dentist office is up there, and there's like it's not a storage, but there's other buildings up along Park
Yeah, I
Street,
think
further away from that.
Yeah, so that's shown in this area. That's like the storage is right under Colburn Drive
Right.
there, and I think the dentist is right across the street, roughly.
I think it's further up from, no, not from the storage. It's not further up on the left-hand side.
I'm fairly certain
guess
it's
I was
in the
just-
commercial 2 district. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I was just kind of wondering if further up Park Street, if there was a decision.
So once you get past this area, if you keep driving towards Old Town, kind of out
Right.
of the field of view here,
Yeah.
there's not a whole lot left on the right-hand side of Park Street. If you're going that direction, it turns into MDR, and
Okay.
it's some kind of bigger residential lots. And then on the left side, it's mostly university land. And then there's a few lots that are also in the university district, but I think might be homes that people own. So this is pretty much the, what's in
That's
view here is
right.
pretty much the end of the commercial portion of the Park Street.
Okay. All righty. Thanks.
Yep.
Anybody else have questions for Kyle? Kyle, I have a question on kind of back to what Laura was kind of pointing out was that trail that's over by the Ave and stuff like that. That's university land, correct?
Mhm.
So if we even look at the 1,000-foot setback, that eliminates those three options down the far Park Street side, correct? So everything would be pretty much out.
Right. Well, and again, it would depend on how you defined, what, if you wanted it to apply to all entrances, if you wanted a setback from any entrance to campus, whether it's a road or a path, then yes, it would probably result in a good chunk of the lots not being eligible, especially combined with the other setbacks from the childcare and the Islamic Center. Because if you had, Rangeley on this side and the path on this side, and then the childcare and Islamic Center kind of in between, there wouldn't be a lot of opportunity there, which again, it's all, this is all, up for discussion, and it's, your decision at the end. I'm just trying to kind of paint the picture of what would happen in each case. Whereas if it was only a setback from Rangeley Road, in that general area, whether, and we'd have to come up with a specific definition of where that point of measurement is, whether it's the center line of, where Rangeley intersects with Park Street. If you did a 500 or 1,000-foot setback from there, then yeah, there's still some potential lots available at the other end of Park Street.
Laura?
I think if we think about the original intent of why there would have been interest in setting this back from Rangeley Road, then we need to think about space away from campus and space away from hundreds, if not more than that, students that are living densely, that we're managing like disorderly large gatherings at, right in that area on Park Street. And so to me, it's quite clear that we should not be having it in C2, and that whole stretch, and that particularly when there's actually an entrance to campus over there, we are kind of bending the original intent by allowing it there. And that we have an area of the town that's very accessible, that where it's allowed, where we just approved it to go in, and it's not appropriate in that location.
Anybody else have? Councilor Perry?
I'm actually kind of torn. I was a guy that was opposed to allowing marijuana sales, period. But it seems to me that when we had a vote, the public thought there was going to be some allowed use on some part of Park Street. So while I kind of my heart is with Laura's comment, and my mind is wondering whether that's really not what the public thought was going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's to be very fair, my mind kind of went to, I can't differentiate between marijuana and alcohol, which right in the heart of all that is a store that sells probably more than most places in town. So yeah, I agree with you on that. I think we just have to figure out as a council what we can collectively agree to, that the citizens would want.
Mhm. Do we have anyone waiting for this decision right now, if that's an appropriate question?
So we have a moratorium, which is what our deadline is around. But there's nothing that says you can't extend the moratorium. As always, staff is really not about having an opinion on what you should do here. I would just say that while I talked about the marijuana ordinance quite a bit during the process that council went through, we were at that point saying it could not be near the entrance to the university. It wasn't going to be near the entrance to the university. The second piece is I 100% get the connection between marijuana, the use of marijuana, the use of alcohol. Legally, they are two very different substances, and marijuana is one that is not allowed at all on campus. Under their federal rules, they have to take a very hard stance against marijuana use on campus.
Any other thoughts?
What do we have? I mean, I know that we have, and I'm not going to be able to name the zones, but I know out on Stillwater out here, we have, it's zoned for that. What do we have left if we discontinue the C2 on Park Street?
Yeah, so I mean, there was the one recent planning board approval for one in the
Right.
University Mall, with the setbacks between marijuana retail stores. It's hard to say, maybe a couple more could potentially go in, but you're moving on to the kind of the other side of the interstate there, and and it would, it'd be a situation where it would have to be new construction completely, and whether access to utilities is as easy. So, and it's hard to say exactly. Those lots are generally bigger size and would be carved out probably.
Right. But would that be the,
so-
I guess my question is, Kyle, would that be the only zone left would be that if we discontinued?
Yeah, so retail stores are allowed in the C1 and
Right.
the C2. So yeah,
That's it.
it would be that area in the C1.
In the C1. Okay.
Laura?
Yeah, I just think we're getting into, I don't want us to be considering too much when we think about this as far as like where else it's allowed. Like we have a zone where it's allowed, whether there's somebody needs to build new construction or put utilities in, like that's not part of our zoning decision in like our guidelines around C2. So I just want to be careful about what we as a council are balancing when we make a decision about this, and we should be focused on Park Street and the intent and desires of the university, which represents way more people and influence than like a business needing to put utilities in across town. Like, so I just think we need to go back to the intent of what this question and like the constituencies that we need to be considering on Park Street where this is being considered.
For purposes of discussion, I'd like to make a decision based on what kind of business we have and people are interested in establishing some kind of a store here, and what we have left if we make a decision to close down Park Street. So for purposes of decision making, that's one of the questions that I wanted to consider.
Councilor Wingard?
Yeah, I wonder if Kyle could speak to the 3 or 4 lots that are on the south end of Park Street. If not the complete C2 moratorium, but the first option were adopted by council, what is the potential for redevelopment of those few remaining lots? Like, are they even viable sites for redevelopment in any realistic way?
Sorry, it's muted. Are you talking about the lots towards the Old Town side as you're like moving towards the reserve, or?
No, on the south side of Park Street, there's a couple lots that are in green on your dotted map.
Right.
And my question is,
And that's like where All Town is and Aroma Joe's and those, I mean, that's kind of that area that's there.
right, maybe I'm misthinking. I thought there were a few lots to the south of that were in green, but perhaps not.
Oh, okay. So, okay, I see what you're saying. It's hard to say. I mean, I'm not I mean, they probably could. They have the size probably where there's some potential that, you know, they might be able to be either repurposed or knocked down and put additional space up. I haven't done like a full look though on the size and would you be able to fit, you know, the appropriate square footage for a store and parking area and things like that though. So it's hard to say for sure.
Yeah, I mean, just from thinking it seems like this discussion might almost be moot, because if those lots are too small to sustain redevelopment, and I think Laura's point to the number of entrances is a good one. It may be immaterial which option we choose, because there may not be any viable lots anyway on Park Street.
Well, I think there are some viable lots, and I think we have had interest in a few, and sort of the follow-up question to all of this, you know, is it adds another layer for council to consider. I think that could change a couple things towards the, you know, getting away from Rangeley, moving down towards the reserve side of Park Street. So it's difficult to answer without, I guess, it going into that as well.
So any other thoughts, questions? So Kyle, from us, you would like to have some direction about one of the options that we kind of can all bite into. Am I correct?
Right. I mean, this is, you know, and this is sort of a fundamental question in the direction of the moratorium of whether, you know, if the, you know, use simply wouldn't be allowed anymore in the district, if that was the intent, or if, you know, we wanted to amend the setback in a certain way where it was off, you know, certain entrances, you know, and in which case, which entrances specifically, and, you know, what level of setback we'd want. You know, are we trying to give it a big buffer, you know, a small, you know, maybe only 1 or 2 lots away? Yeah, I mean, it's really the foundation of the moratorium, and it would be difficult to move forward with that without getting some feedback.
Yeah, so I guess for me personally, I don't want to create, I mean, obviously this was the voice of the voters of what they wanted. I don't want to hold people's hands tied behind their back because of whether or not we agree or do agree or whatever. So having said that, my thoughts would be to use your option 1, which would at least leave the 3 lots down at the back, at the far end, available. Like I said, I think that there's, they've already got stuff down there like the Thriftway or whatever that produces a lot of sales and alcohol. I don't think you can differentiate the two. So that would be my suggestion. I'd like to hear from what everybody else would think.
And I think one of my concerns too is if we only have the C1 area, would they, and I can't remember what we decided about distance between marijuana retail stores. I would hate to see that area just become a big marijuana district, I guess. If we only had that one, zone that was allowed for retail stores. And I'm gonna have to go with Terry. I think I'd much prefer option 1 as well, that
Laura?
we saw on the slide.
I mean, I guess I'm going to continue to advocate against C1, ultimately against C1, which is there is an entrance to the university right there. And so, and we have hundreds of students living right there. And that entrance was added to campus because there's hundreds of students living right there. And so I don't see how we can say that, one, we're like environmentally bicycle pedestrian focused when we're not acknowledging an entrance to campus that is focused on walking and biking and just pretending that that's not an entrance, or the issues that we have with the fact that we have such a high density of a student population, greater even than lives on College Avenue, living there, that it's a good idea to add retail outlets of a substance that is not federally approved into our community within walking distance of 152 families that are living in Talmar Wood. So there's numerous reasons, and I don't think it was the intent when these discussions were made early on that these retail outlets would be close to campus. And with the development of these student housing lots, the campus line and this walking entrance, this is close to campus. And so I'm strongly against this.
Any other thoughts? Jeff?
Yeah, I think I would advocate for kind of a middle path. I prefer the C1 option, but I also think Laura's point is a great one regarding the broader definition of what is an entrance to the university. So if our language could include some discussion or description of different entrances, particularly biking and pedestrian entrances, I think that would be helpful. It respects what the voters have said, and it recognizes the reality that these are heavily used entrances and egresses from the university.
Tom?
I really like Jeff's suggestion and would support exploring some way of including the bike and pedestrian entrance in our work.
Any other?
So
Okay, go ahead, Kyle. Sorry.
I could put together another, kind of set of visuals to represent some different levels of setbacks from both, Rangeley Road and the bike ped path, along with, the existing other uses that would require to be set back from, and kind of give you a visual representation of what that would look like. before making any final decisions on, whether you want to, if that would still allow for any lots on the corridor to be developed, or if that, all of those combined would kind of eliminate, any lot from being eligible. So I could put that together and bring it to a future committee meeting.
Sounds good.
Won't work for you, but that sounds like a good next step.
All right, Kyle, continue.
Sure. Okay, so there were a couple other small things not related to the moratorium that have, sort of popped up as either things that staff just didn't consider during drafting the ordinance, or have kind of come to our attention after the fact. So first, so we initially allowed cultivation facilities. And when you think of cultivation, it's, we define that as, both adult use cultivation and cultivation areas for registered caregivers and dispensaries. So our larger scale cultivation would be allowed in the commercial 1 and economic development zones, but we also allowed smaller scale cultivation, which is, we define it as up to 500 square feet of mature plant canopy. We allowed that in the forest and agriculture district. And the point of this was because that 500 square feet of mature plant canopy translates to the amount allowed for registered caregivers to grow themselves. So it was giving a place in town for registered caregivers to have the opportunity to grow their allowable amount of plants. And we limited that to the forest and agriculture district when when we were drafting the ordinance. But when you look through the ordinance, I think it's, we have our in-town zoning districts, where you have the MDR and downtown and commercial 2 and all of those, and then you have your your rural area, which is the forest and agriculture district, and then in between, as you get west of the interstate around Stillwater and moving out towards the forest and agriculture district, you have the low density residential district. And I've put in here the sort of purpose of that district as it's written in the ordinance, where it's intended to accommodate a mixture of residential uses, open space uses, and rural uses compatible with low density residential environment. So when you look through that table of land uses at other sorts of kind of agricultural, growing type uses, and you see that greenhouses are an allowable land use in both the forest and agriculture district as well as the low density residential district. Agriculture as a land use, while it requires site plan review more in town, it only requires a permit in the forest and agriculture district and low density residential district. So the point is that the low density residential district can kind of be seen as this, hybrid of, yeah, it's starting to become a little more residential than our forest and agriculture district, but it is supposed to still maintain some of the kind of agricultural roots of the more rural parts of town. It's, really supposed to be that transitional district between the two. So I thought that it was, after, looking into this a little bit and considering it, that it was worth bringing up to the council as to whether or not they thought that small scale cultivation allowance of, that 500 square feet of plant canopy should be allowed in the low density residential district as well as the forest and agriculture district, which would, give those, and again, this is just for some sort of growing that would fall under a cultivation facility. So your typical, just person growing, marijuana for themselves, this wouldn't apply to them. They would still follow the normal home cultivation rules where they could only grow their 3 plants. This would really be for someone like a registered caregiver, or something like that, where they didn't necessarily want to have a large several thousand square foot indoor growing operation that was more in kind of industrial commercial scale in the commercial 1 or EDZ, but they did need some room to grow their plants as a caregiver or something. So with that, open it up for discussion.
Great. Is there anybody out there who have questions? Councilor Mitchell?
Kyle, would it be possible, and it might take a minute for you to pull it up, but to show a map of like how I've looked at it, but it might be valuable for others to see?
A map of the low density district?
Correct. Yes. Thank you.
Probably could. Can you see a map? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I've never done the screen sharing with 2 monitors before, so so yeah, you can see there the kind of beige coloring, with is the low density district. Stillwater Ave sort of runs through the, it's a big corridor that runs through, and then it also kind of goes out towards the Forest and Agriculture District along Forest Ave. And it sort of has turns into the commercial 1 district as you start to get towards the, the shopping center and things like that. And it pretty much stays low density residential almost until you get to the town line moving into Bangor. So that's generally a larger, I guess it's pretty worth mentioning. The low density district is, fairly large lots. It's a minimum lot size of 60,000 square feet. So while there are some, single family home residential subdivisions in the low density district, they are, larger lots than you'd find in the MDR district, for instance.
Any other questions for Kyle?
I don't have a question, but a comment. Caregiving is a business, and I think the lot sizes are big enough that they can handle that. Low density residential can handle that less than 500 square foot canopy. So I would be in favor of allowing that.
Okay.
In Orono.
And yeah, I mean, just to follow up on that, this would also just be talking about, take a registered caregiver, for instance. This would only be talking about the growing cultivation side of their operation. This wouldn't let them necessarily have a caregiver retail store in this area. The retail aspect would still have to take place in the commercial 1 district only. So this would only be for the cultivation area for something like that.
Any other thoughts? Yeah, so Kyle, I'm actually also, I'm in favor of it being in the LDR as well. I think that the biggest focal point was, as long as there's no smell, that, you know, if it gets, but those are usually the bigger operations. So my thoughts would be this would be a good move to help with small cultivation.
And they would still have to meet all of those standards in the ordinance. So there would have to be an odor mitigation plan. You know, just like that's how we have it written right now for these types of you know, growing areas in the forest and agriculture district. So if there was an issue, it would be in direct violation of the ordinance.
So would the council be okay with adding LDR within this? Any opposition? Hearing none, I think the guidance to you, Kyle, would be to add that in the LDR into that.
Okay. Let me go back to the presentation. Okay, and there was one final kind of topic to talk about with this that's sort of in a similar light as to what we were just talking about with kind of cultivation and you know, kind of smaller scale cultivation. So marijuana nurseries, they are a type of adult use cultivation facility under the state law. They are a sort of a hybrid between cultivation and a retail space. And when we were initially doing the draft ordinance language for marijuana establishments, this wasn't something that we considered. I'm not 100% sure if it wasn't expanded fully on in state law at the time with the rules. Looking back through some other ordinances adopted by different towns and some of the MMA presentations and workshops that we attended, I don't think it was heavily focused on if it was mentioned at that time. So whatever the reason was, it was something that had sort of gone overlooked through our initial crafting of the marijuana ordinance. And a nursery cultivation facility is really focusing on growing immature marijuana plants and seedlings. And the big difference is, aside from growing seedlings and immature plants primarily instead of mature plants, is that the larger scale cultivation facilities can only sell marijuana to other marijuana businesses. They can sell to marijuana manufacturing facilities or other cultivation facilities or retail stores, whatever it is, but they can't sell directly to consumers. Nurseries can sell seedlings and immature plants and marijuana seeds to consumers. That's, I think, more of their primary purpose. Every person, of legal age is allowed to grow their 3 mature marijuana plants on the property that they live in. That's state law, and that was the one thing in the marijuana law that a municipality couldn't really regulate. So I think these nurseries are the primary or one of the primary means of supplying the ability to grow those plants for people interested. And they are talking about scale, they're limited to 1,000 square feet of plant canopy. And they also have to abide by both the cultivation rules as well as the retail store rules for the area of their business that they dedicate to retail sales. So under the state law, there's rules for each type of marijuana business. Nurseries have to kind of follow all of the rules for both types. My question and reason for bringing this up is, since this wasn't something that we really ever discussed through the crafting of the ordinance, is should this be something that we look to incorporate into the ordinance? If you look at, when we were crafting the ordinance, as far as zoning goes, we looked at where the non-marijuana versions of those land uses were allowed when we were talking about zoning. So if retail stores were allowed in the commercial 1 and commercial 2 districts, well, that was our basis for choosing those districts for marijuana retail stores. So if you look at just nurseries and greenhouses in general, they're allowed in the forest and agriculture district, the low density residential, the C1 and C2 districts. Now, marijuana nurseries would be a type of cultivation facility, which we currently allow cultivation facilities, other types of marijuana cultivation in the commercial 1, economic development zone, and now, the LDR based on that last discussion that we just had on the previous slide. So some potential standards to consider if there was interest in kind of expanding the definition of cultivation facility in our ordinance to include nurseries would probably be something like in a district like the commercial 1 or EDZ, marijuana nurseries could be a principal commercial use, and they would operate like any other commercial business would. So like the larger scale cultivation facilities or like a marijuana retail store, they would follow the same sorts of guidelines and be allowed in the same sorts of areas. Because they're sort of limited in their scale, and nurseries are really more so for the immature plants and seedlings, there would be potential, I think, to consider allowing them in the more rural areas of town, just like we were talking about with the areas for registered caregivers to grow their 500 square feet of mature plants. There would be potential here to allow nurseries, no more than 1,000 square feet in the forest and agriculture or low density residential district as well. And if that were the case, then as there is a retail component to marijuana nurseries, you would probably want to put some sort of limit on that, where they had to follow certain standards like home businesses do, which would limit the amount of retail traffic coming in and out of any residential neighborhood, because it wouldn't purely be just cultivation anymore. There could be some small aspect of retail involved as well. And then they would obviously follow all of the other standards that we created for cultivation facilities, as far as developing odor control plans and screening the plants and things like that. So I'm curious for any feedback on this, and kind of direction as to what, if anything, about marijuana nurseries we should include in the ordinance.
Any questions for Kyle?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, go ahead, Cheryl.
Can, under the state, and I'm not sure I'm not sure if the plants are not mature and they're just seedlings and they're selling seeds and they're just, I'm assuming this is a cloning kind of thing, or seedling or from seeds. Are they allowed to set up a booth at like a farmer's market and sell from there? Is that an allowable use for these nurseries?
I don't think that is talked about under state law. I imagine that would be something to the local municipality. And I believe that when we had created the temporary markets ordinance a while back, we did prohibit the sale of marijuana or marijuana products at that time. But that was also before a lot of the discussion on whether Orono would opt in to allow marijuana businesses. So So currently, even if they were allowed under state law, I'm not sure that they would be allowed under our local ordinances to do that.
Okay. I think we should include them.
Laura?
Kyle, are you asking us this because you've gotten requests for it, or you're just noticing that it's missing and it's a gap we could fill?
Well, I'd say both. I mean, it came to my attention mainly because, I had a couple people talking about it, the potential of it. But it's also something in, as I've been looking through the marijuana ordinances of other places a lot lately, again, it's something I then noticed and started looking more into, and realized that it wasn't something we considered. So we probably should have a discussion about it.
That's fine. I was just really
Yep.
trying to understand if there was requests for it.
Sure.
Okay. Okay. So there are. Okay. Thank you.
Jeff?
I remember several years ago, maybe 10 years ago now, we had a discussion about zoning, specifically about how we could make the FNA remain viable and keep our community diverse and economically diverse. And one of the things was to encourage a variety of businesses in the FNA that were consistent with forestry and agriculture uses. This, to me, seems reasonable. The other thing I'd note is that when I was driving down Stillwater by the Rotary last weekend, I saw a handmade sign pointing in the direction of a nursery, which I did not explore at that time, but it seems like this kind of business is probably happening. So maybe we should recognize that and try to regulate it in some way if necessary.
I
think
do
saw the
believe
same
just that,
signs. Yeah.
just the sign was in Orono. The person occupying that business was not located in Orono, from what I know.
Laura? Sorry, Tom?
I'm just interested, Jeff, were you advocating to allow it in just the forest and agricultural district?
I was. I think it's different than allowing a caregiver to grow a limited amount. I think a commercial use like this is something that's probably appropriate for the FNA, but maybe not for the LDR.
I would agree with that.
Laura?
Yeah, I just was, the C1 also, I wasn't clear in the economic development zones, like why we would, like the FNA I understand, but the others I'm not on board.
So the C1, allows cultivation facilities right now and retail stores as a sort of hybrid between the two. I guess if someone wanted to have a formal storefront where they, had, a 1,500 square foot space where, 1,000 feet of it was dedicated to their cultivation area and 500 was just a small little shop window where they sold the seedlings and, maybe gardening supplies or something. I think it would be something like that. And that would allow a little more vehicle traffic and trip generation than if we allowed it in the forest and agriculture and it had to abide by home business standards. The home business standards really limit the amount of people that can come to and from the property in any given day or at one time. So I think it would just depend on the scale of what someone was looking to do, whether it was going to be, a business that they focused on, or whether it was just kind of something on the side that they did on their property. That was sort of the line of thinking there.
Okay, I would, based upon that, I understand that then for C1, based upon our conversation that we just had, I would disagree then on C2.
Any other thoughts, questions for Kyle? So for me personally, I agree pretty much with everybody. I think when I also thought about when you talk about somebody maybe having a storefront, I'm thinking about, for some reason, my mind went to that. What was the name of that store that was on the right off the highway on Stillwater off 95, like Brother and Brother or something like that. It was a
Friend and friend.
and it's like I thought of that space being a place where somebody could probably cultivate, and then on the front end of the store use it as a place to kind of sell. So I think it's important to kind of keep that C1 in there. So are we kind of all in agreement that you have the C1 plus the agricultural side, the district for the two options, or
I was thinking strictly forest and agriculture, but I'd be willing to look at what Carl comes up with.
so Kyle, could we just look at it that way? What either, I mean, we all definitely are in favor of the agricultural side of it. But the C1, I'd be more curious about that if somebody, so we don't limit them to, if they do it, rurally, they only allowed so much traffic. So Sophie, did you?
Kyle,
Are these facilities primarily indoors? These nurseries, would they be a greenhouse facility?
I think so. Typically, I haven't seen too many, in like actually, how they operate. I can say that the way we wrote the ordinance in general about cultivation facilities was that if it was in the C1 or EDZ, they had to be located indoors. If it was in the forest and agriculture district, they could either be in a greenhouse or outdoors, but if they were outdoors, they had to be fenced and locked in an area, so that similar standards could apply here, I think.
Kyle, can you show us the zoning map again? And so like point out the key ones we're talking about?
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay. So, to zoom out pretty far to get the whole forest and agriculture district there. But the forest and agriculture district is all the green. So primarily the area west of the interstate, as you get away from the low density district and move out towards the lake. There's a lot of large parcels that are undeveloped and will probably continue to be undeveloped in the forest and agriculture district, but you do get some more residential properties as you move out towards the lake. And then our C1 district, you can kind of see here, which is the area around the interstate exit on Stillwater Ave.
Any other
Kyle,
questions?
the nurseries, would they require all the ventilation? Because that's not really a odor issue when the plants haven't matured. So do they have regulations around those kinds of things as well?
Right. I'm not sure exactly what the state law requires them to submit. I imagine at the very least they'd have to have some sort of plan in place that states that they're not going to have any odors go past the property line. It might not be as strict as specifying certain ventilation technologies be used to mitigate it. It might be more so of just stating that you won't create an odor issue.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think the concerns would probably be less than one of these 5,000 to 7,000 square foot cultivation operations with all mature plants and things like that.
It's primarily a greenhouse that might sell gardening supplies. I'd be in favor of looking into the EDZ zones too, as a place for them to locate. the nurseries.
Great. Any other questions for Kyle? See everybody. So are we all kind of in agreement then to F&A is a definite, but to look at C1 and Cheryl would like to kind of look at EDZ, what that would look like also. And then we'll come back, Kyle.
Sure, that sounds good.
Okay. Great. Was that it, Kyle? Nope. Laura?
Is this coming back to committee again?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
That's it for me, I think. Thank you.
Great, Kyle. Good job. Thank you. So let's move on to number 4, review of, oh, sorry.
I was just say, Kyle, can you stay for this part of the presentation, please?
Yes, I was planning to.
Great. So we're going to go to the review of conceptual plans, Main Street Sidewalk Pedestrian Safety Project. Rob, are you batting first?
Yes, I am. So good evening. I am excited to be here to talk to you about the Main Street Safety and ADA Improvements Project. We've been working on this for several months. Tonight we're joined by Brad Lyon. He's the project manager with our design consultant, Sebago Technics. He's got a presentation to go through that will give us some background information. The conceptual plans that we developed in partnership with the advisory committee, and then talk about what we'd like to propose for next steps with this project. So Brad, you all set to go?
All set to go. Thanks, Rob. Good evening, everyone. Once again, my name's Brad Lyon. For those of you that don't know me, traffic engineer and project manager for this assignment for the town of Orono. I'm going to try to pull up the presentation here. Presumably I have the ability to share my screen, so just bear with me 1 second. Everyone see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's dive right in. So agenda, what we want to cover tonight is really start by providing you some overall background on the work that's been done on the corridor to date. It's important to note that although we're presenting you a project that's really been developed over the last 6+ months, the genesis of this project really has started dating back to 2017. So we're going to cover some of the background that helped to facilitate some of the design and planning decisions that we made for this project. We'll obviously be talking about the project limits we were asked to look at as part of our assignment, and obviously the overall scope of work. From there, what we'll look to do is cover the overall master plan that was developed for the corridor, and then we'll look to follow up with a more detailed plan outlining what we're proposing as part of the first phase of implementation. So the idea would be set the stage so you know kind of in the long term what the vision is for the corridor, and then what we're proposing for the near future as a first phase of implementation. And then we'll open it up to general discussion. The one thing I would encourage you guys, and I'm not sure how comfortable you are with these types of presentations and doing this, but I have no problem, especially on Zoom, it's difficult. If you guys have questions or comments, feel free to chime right in and interrupt me. Used to doing this in person and reading the crowd, and it's a little more difficult on Zoom. So once again, feel free to interject. I'm going to be looking at the PowerPoint, so once again, feel free to speak up as you have questions. So to start, here in front of you, you've got a graphic outlining the project limits that we're asked to look at as part of this. To the left of your screen, you're looking at the intersection of Main Street and Kelly Road. And you can kind of see, not sure how well it shows up on your screen, but that lower red kind of defines the boundaries or the general limits of what we were asked to look at. So middle of the corridor, Gilbert Island Ave, then working to the north towards RSU 26 and Westwood Drive, and then finally to the signalized intersections of Pine and Mill, ultimately stopping just before the bridge. For those of you familiar, Marsh Island Brewing and the trail through that area. So to start, a little background on the project, and I alluded to this in the beginning, is this really started back in 2017 through a downtown traffic and circulation study that Sebago Technics was actually commissioned by the town to do at the time. It's important to note that this study really just looked at the downtown area, however. So if you look back at this previous graphic, the downtown study really just went from Westwood Drive through the signals and really didn't look at a majority of this corridor, but it still was an important planning study, and a lot of recommendations came out of it that we tried to incorporate into this project here. Within that, really, what was determined was a number of items, some medium, short-term to medium-term recommendations, and a few long-term considerations. A couple of the items I want to focus on here, you guys can certainly read this on your screen, but some of the key elements is a reduction of the travel lanes. What you have out there today is right around 12 feet. Reduction of the travel lanes from 11 feet, and in some immediate areas, 10.5 feet, mostly in the downtown area was what was recommended. The reason for that is twofold. It's traffic calming and also to try to provide some more space for bicyclists. Moving through the list, again, there were some minor adjustments recommended for the main Pine Street traffic signal. Big focus, you'll hear me talk a lot about this tonight, is location of crosswalks. Both consolidating crosswalks where appropriate, in some cases eliminating, but more important than any of those two elements, it's really careful consideration of where crosswalks are going to be placed. And what dovetails nicely into crosswalks, in addition to the placement of them, it's the treatment of them. So there was a lot of discussion in this study about curb extensions, speed tables to slow down traffic, not listed here, but center median islands for refuge area was also talked about. Again, accommodation for bicyclists, and then various wayfinding and signage to improve notification to motorists of crosswalks and bicycle facilities. Another important study that's been done in the past, in addition to that downtown planning study, is the Heads Up campaign, which was really a partnership between Maine DOT and BCM, or otherwise known as the Bicycle Coalition of Maine. This study, as you can see here, really started in 2017 and finished up in this year, and involved 21 communities, including, of course, Orono, which we're discussing today. The focus of that campaign was to actually do a planning exercise for the region as a whole, to hold public meetings, to collect data. Some of the other elements were to look at infrastructure improvements needed for the region and developing programs focused both on education and actually also on enforcement. This really, as you see in the graphic, obviously needs a little updating because it just shows to 2018. But the genesis of this was in light of an increase in pedestrian fatalities, not only in the state of Maine, but really something we're seeing throughout the country. Not listed here is bicycle fatalities. I can only speak to Maine in that light, unfortunately, but in Maine, we're not seeing a dramatic increase like this, but we're also not seeing a decrease. So whatever we can do to obviously reduce those numbers is important for all users of the roadway. And so in looking at this data, there's a number of factors that contribute to this. I think I don't need to tell you guys this. The main factor is distracted driving. We all get that little device in our pockets. We're not looking at the road. That's important to be aware of. And it's also being able to provide safe facilities for all users of the roadway. So that's really what this study focused on. Again, not only for Orono, but for a number of communities in the region. So as part of that study, you see a little graphic on the right. A pedestrian safety action plan was developed for each specific community, including Orono. That came out back in January. And again, that process started back in 2017 that led up to that action plan. Starting with a community safety forum, and then following that up was a safer walking behavior forum that was held approximately 9 months later. And it's interesting, and you can read that and see there was a lot of public outreach locally, just trying to get observations from what people were seeing on the roadway network. Again, not just on Main Street, but within the community as a whole. Again, distracted driving was a big concern. Inattentive pedestrians, wrong way bicyclists in some cases were really seen. And then if you back up real quick to the community safety forum, I didn't touch on that, but the signalized intersections of both Mill and Pine, out of Orono as a whole, throughout the whole community, that intersection was ranked as the highest priority that really needed some attention within the town of Orono. So that action plan, as you can see on the last little bullet point here, came up with short, mid, and long-term recommendations. 5 locations were actually identified throughout Orono. 2 locations, as you can see here, Site 1, Site 3 are actually specific to this project. And those elements, and again, you can read that, it's the 2 signalized intersections that I previously spoke about, and then it's Main Street, basically from Pine Street, working south to Westwood Drive. So really that immediate vicinity within RSU 26. And a lot of those recommendations focused on what we like to call the 4 E's. Sometimes people call it the 5 E's, depending if you want to include engineering in there, but it focused on engineering, education, encouragement, enforcement, and evaluation. And again, I won't go in a lot of detail on this, but specific to Orono, there's actually a separate set of recommendations for enforcement. And again, for those of you that aren't familiar with the report, I certainly would encourage you to take a look at that. That's all available for download, both on the Bicycle Coalition's website and I believe on the Maine DOT's website now, although a couple months ago it wasn't.
That's on our website too, Brad.
It is on your website now too? Okay,
Yeah.
Good to know. Okay, so diving in a little bit closer as to some specific elements that again were recommended out of the Maine DOT Heads Up program. You see those 2 sites I referenced earlier, Site 1, Site 3, ranging from short to long-term recommendations. And again, you guys can read through these, but really quick, some really low cost but highly effective mitigation items were recommended, such as yield to pedestrian signage and LPI at the signal. Some of these elements, I should note, have already been implemented, but not all. Some aren't working, to be perfectly honest, the way they should be. So as part of our work here, we'll be working with Rob to kind of get everything up to snuff, if you will, for lack of a better term. LPI, for those of you that don't know, that's an acronym for lead pedestrian interval. For concurrent pedestrian phases at a traffic signal, meaning when pedestrians are navigating through a crosswalk adjacent to moving vehicles, the LPI gives pedestrians an advanced walk symbol to get out in the crosswalk to get a head start before there's a conflict with a vehicle. That's highly effective, especially for, if you look at the graphic on the right, if you can imagine coming off Mill or coming off Pine, making that right turn on red, or when the green comes up, you know, people gunning the signal and making that right turn. It at least gets the pedestrians in the field of view rather than them simultaneously stepping out in the crosswalk. So that's a highly effective mitigation item as well. And then access management was a big deal. You guys that are familiar with the corridor know there's a number of very wide curb cuts, undefined pedestrian space. Therefore, you've got turning vehicles mixing with pedestrians. Number of recommendations for the Irving Circle K, widen the sidewalk. And then a long-term recommendation for this area, although we're not addressing it as part of this plan, just because it's cost prohibitive, to be perfectly honest, is squaring up of the intersection, the Bennick Main Street intersection, and that skew. There was a recommendation from Maine DOT to really try to square that up to improve visibility. Working down to the south, the Heads Up program recommended improvements generated by Sebago study, plus looking at improving crosswalk locations, like I mentioned earlier, really being cognizant of where you're putting crosswalks, how you're treating the crosswalks, and who are the users of those crosswalks. The fire station, you guys all know, trying to do some access management there. That is obviously, you know, the fire station requires a wide entrance for obvious reasons, but that's not to say that a visual visual treatment can be provided across a curb to, again, provide that pedestrian space and really delineate the pedestrian space from vehicles. And then the long-term, some of the long-term recommendations were to look at the bicycle facilities, really analyze the feasibility of providing formal bike lanes. So providing bikes their own space rather than mixing in the sidewalk with pedestrians, or a bigger issue, mixing with vehicles. When we're constrained for space, certainly pavement markings that you're all familiar with, providing sharrows in the travel lane is a possibility, but wherever we can, especially in a setting like this, providing dedicated bike lanes and bump outs for crosswalks, again, to improve visibility for pedestrians was recommended. So given that background, I'd like to just dive into kind of what we've done to date, and go into the project in a little more detail. And again, so Sebago Technics was competitively selected by the town of Orono, again, just to set the stage, to really look at some of these options that were recommended, both in the previous planning study, the Heads Up program, among some other materials that were available to us, and allowed us to really kind of look at transforming this corridor. And again, really to look at multimodal focus, multimodal being, you know, I talked a lot about pedestrians, bicyclists, but also transit in some cases, looking at, you know, are there opportunities to provide additional bus stops, opportunities to move bus stops to a safer location, where those bus stops are located, provided safe crossings where those buses are dropping off so people can get from one side of the street to the other. And really looked at the feasibility of implementing these various improvements. So even given all this information at hand through these previous studies, we found it was really incredibly important to note that Sebago did not perform this work in a vacuum. Yes, Sebago was kind of, you know, involved with the 2017 study, but to the town's credit and Rob's group, he encouraged us to kind of interface with the advisory committee. And so what you see down here is some dates where the advisory committee was met with back on February 24th, April 13th, and April 29th. Just to give you a sense as to who was on that committee, because advisory committee is obviously a pretty broad term. For those of you that don't know, Terry, who you guys obviously all know, was on that, Terry Greenier. Rob was on it, Sophie Wilson. Mark Brewer, some people that you may or may not know, Mark Brewer was on it, who's a resident that lives directly on Main Street. Lisa Feldman, who lives in the area, who's an alternative transit user, was involved in the committee. Fiona Sorensen, who's a local biker, was involved, who also lives in Orono. Eric De Silva also lives in the area, bikes and walks a lot, but also manages the education program for the Bicycle Coalition of Maine. So Eric was heavily involved. Jeff Gordon, who I'm sure many of you know, former council chairman, was involved. And finally, Meredith Higgins, who's the superintendent for RSU 26, who you all probably know pretty well. So again, these three meetings, real quick, that first meeting, February 24th, that was more or less a kickoff meeting for the project. Basically doing exactly what I did on those first few slides, presenting background of the project, some of the past studies, defining the limits of work, and then providing some options for treatment. And then as a design team, we basically took a step back and solicited a bunch of feedback. We went to the drawing board. We presented 3 concepts to the committee on April 13th. Based on the feedback we heard, we obviously vetted those concepts, really came up with a hybrid concept, which resulted in what we deem concept 4. Yeah, we're very innovative with our concept numbers here. So concept 4 on April 29th, which was our final committee meeting. So there are a couple of tweaks that came out of that, but I think we checked a lot of the boxes that the advisory committee wanted us to look at. I'll be honest with you, it's not the perfect plan because there are some priorities that need to take place. There's obviously only so much space within the right of way, and it really comes down to how do you solicit that space to the various users of the roadway. But it was a pretty good hybrid of those previous 3 concepts. So again, there were a couple minor tweaks that we made to that. We finalized that concept, And then we went to Rob with that and really developed both a master plan and then what we're presenting to you in a little more detail today, a phase 1 implementation plan, which is really the first phase for implementation that kind of speaks to the budget that we believe we have at hand. So with that being said, we'll get right into some of the details of what we're proposing for this corridor. You guys don't need to be too concerned about this legend. To be perfectly honest, I'm not too excited about it because it's just various shades of gray and a blue, but I'll kind of explain to you as we go through it. But a couple elements of note in case I skip over it, again, in the interest of time, but some elements that are consistent throughout the corridor that you just want to keep in the back of your mind is the sidewalk that's present on the westerly side of the road. We're proposing for that all to be reconstructed. In some areas, it's in pretty bad shape, but for the most part, we weren't able to find a lot of locations that were even ADA compliant. So what that means is providing, flat ramps, detectable warning fields at crosswalks, and really safe sidewalks so that all types of pedestrians can use the sidewalk safely. So we thought it was important to both reconstruct the sidewalk on the westerly side. We also have sidewalk on the easterly side, starting at Island Ave, that will be reconstructed in the same manner. It's important to note between the curb, so basically curb to curb for the most part, we're proposing to retain where the existing center line of the road is being located and really bringing the stripe, the fog line, that white line on either side in a foot to 11-foot travel lanes. And then, like I said, in some cases, 10.5 feet. And again, the reason for that is to try to provide dedicated space for bicyclists, and it gives us a little more flexibility as to where we can put the curb line for the sidewalk. And again, I talked about this, bike lanes in both directions due to the narrowing of the travel lanes allow us to have those bike lanes up until Pine Street. And then a number of the crosswalk treatments, and I'll show you, the first couple, but a number of the crosswalk treatments, what we're proposing is to use rectangular rapid flashing beacons. I'm sure many of you, if you guys drive through the roundabout, you know what those look like. They're pedestrian actuated flashers. The important thing to note is those are not flashing 24 hours a day, which makes them actually more effective because they don't blend into the background. The other thing we're looking at here is lighting of the crosswalks themselves, meaning at night, visibility of the crosswalks in some cases is dire at best. So these RFBs, they are solar powered. You can get them inline AC, but we're proposing solar powered. And there's the option, if budget allows, to actually include illumination on the RFBs such that when they're pressed, not only do they flash, but they light up the crosswalks. All right, so getting into the overall plan, and again, some of this I'm going to go through really quick in the interest of time, but please interrupt if I'm going through something too quick. Again, chime in or ask a question, or if something's unclear to you, let me know. So again, what you're looking at here is the overall master plan. So this is not what we're proposing to build, quote unquote, day one, but this is the overall vision for the corridor. So, we thought it was important that you guys understand the overall context of the corridor and kind of where we're headed. So to start, we're starting at the southerly end of Main Street. So you see Kelly Road there. I'm not sure if you guys see my cursor, but Kelly Road to the left. Working to the right. So as you work to the right, we're going north up Main Street. So some elements to really be aware of here is you'll see some of the call outs. We're proposing to widen Main Street by a couple feet to provide a bike lane in between the through and the right turn lane, which ultimately transitions to a dedicated bike lane to the north around Dirigo Drive. I'll be honest, it is a bike lane that once you get through the signal does lead to nowhere, but you get a pretty sizable shoulder there. There's space, but obviously we have to kind of draw the limits at some point. So there is a dedicated bike lane in between those travel lanes. In the opposite direction, heading northbound, we're proposing a bike lane. There's a little more room there. We got about 6.5 feet for a bike lane. And again, the idea there is, and actually I'm getting ahead a little bit. So on the easterly side of the road, you'll see new sidewalk as well. So going up to Dirigo Drive, you'll also see a new crosswalk connecting that new sidewalk that we're proposing from Kelly Road to Dirigo Drive, and then basically connecting to what is now the existing sidewalk infrastructure on the westerly side of the road. And that bike lane I referenced a little bit prematurely heading northbound, like I said, is around 6.5 feet. And the reason for that is that curb line where we're putting in that new sidewalk, we're trying to stay on the existing edge of pavement, really to try to keep the cost down from a drainage perspective, but there certainly is some flexibility as far as the width is concerned in this area. You'll see, and again, many of you familiar with this corridor, there's not as much flexibility as we move to the north. But again, that's kind of what's going on in this area. So dedicated bike lane, sidewalk on the easterly side, new crosswalk to the north of Dirigo Drive.
Excuse me, Brad, can you?
Yes.
Yeah. Jeff, you go first.
Oh, I was just going to ask for clarification of the colors. What does the red dotted line or hatched line?
Oh, thank you. This is, yeah, so the red, yeah, up here on this side of the screen, and again, I'm not sure if you guys see my cursor, that represents the right-of-way. So that's the right-of-way line, you know, basically between the public right-of-way and private property. So one thing I didn't mention is one of the first efforts that we did as part of this before we started kind of putting pen to paper is we have a full topographic survey of the corridor, and we've also done complete right-of-way research. So it's important for us to understand where that is. The blue line, just to kind of represent the colors here, that blue bold line represents new curb. And again, what we're proposing for curbing is slip form concrete. The sidewalk in this area would be bituminous. So it's all kind of rebuilt bituminous. Obviously where the existing sidewalk is, the idea would be, you know, we strip off the pavement, regrade the gravel, try to use as much of the gravel as we can, and then repave, if that makes sense. But that red line is the right of way to answer your question directly.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. And there was another question, I believe.
Yeah, can you speak to kind of the thinking behind the sidewalk on the easterly side, I believe,
Sure.
across from Dirigo Drive?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. There are a couple of factors at play that led us to sidewalk on that. So number one is we thought it was important that some sidewalk infrastructure be provided between Dirigo and Kelly, right? So the question then becomes, do you put the sidewalk on the westerly side, like you're alluding to, or the easterly side? If we were to put sidewalk on the westerly side of the road, so basically continuing where it is today, there's two things that are a challenge for us. Number one is, those of you that are familiar with that kind of Kelly Road juncture there, that Gore area, there's a pretty big drop off in that area. So if we're widening the road plus adding sidewalk, the costs associated with that, whether it's a fill, retaining wall with a fence, becomes pretty problematic. The other element is, since you would be bringing a sidewalk, if you can follow me, and this is always tough on Zoom, but if you can visualize bringing a sidewalk up Kelly Road, again, it kind of leads to nowhere. And it would be ideal to provide a crosswalk for someone on the residential side to get to this sidewalk, because then you wouldn't need the crosswalk at Dirigo. But the problem becomes, and it's not a problem, it's just a cost issue. But when you provide the crosswalk at this intersection, it's got to be signalized because it's part of a signal. So we would be into, you know, pedestal poles, pedestrian signal heads, APS push buttons, and the like. So it's to be honest, some of it's a cost decision, and then the other element is, you know, you have a number of residences on the easterly side of the road, so trying to connect the easterly side of the road to the existing westerly sidewalk infrastructure, if that makes sense.
So was there a demand for sidewalk out to Kelly Road, and that's why we're addressing it? Or like, how did even the concept of the need for sidewalk out to Kelly Road arise?
I'm not sure in the past. Oh, go ahead, Rob.
So yeah, there was some people that live in that area, particularly in the Deerville Pines area, do a lot of walking, and they were concerned with pedestrian safety in that Kelly Road area, since there is no sidewalk past Dirigo Drive now. So we tried to make, put together the best solution we could to get people through that intersection if they were going to walk on the shoulder up there, without, as safely as we could, without having to rebuild the intersection and reconfigure the signals. This part of the project isn't in the phase one portion of the work anyways, because it's kind of an extension. It goes beyond what we can afford really in this first phase. So this is conceptual and something that we could add in or not later, with the idea that perhaps someday we may want to extend the sidewalk further. But
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
No, it's a good point, though. I mean, there was a lot of discussion around it, whether you provide sidewalk or not, what side of the road does it go on? There was a lot of back and forth, and we had a lot of differing opinions, certainly at the advisory committee level.
And
But
Brad,
yeah,
to also add to that, I do know of a couple people who live in Dirigo Pines that walk up to the country club to eat there, and they have concerns about walkage to get to the country club because it's so close to them to eat.
Sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And again, you can hopefully you can see it. The graphic's not great, but again, all crosswalks, as I referenced on the previous slide, would be treated with rectangular rapid flashing beacons. So again, to draw attention to that crosswalk location, if that was to move forward. But like Rob mentioned, that's not part of the phase one plan. So moving northerly, vicinity of Willow Ave, not a lot to talk about in this area, to be perfectly honest. It's a pretty typical section, downsizing the travel lanes from 12 to 11, reconstructed sidewalk on the westerly side of the road, if you can see that. So again, that blue line represents that slip form concrete I spoke of. Let's see, I think that's pretty much it. Dedicated bike lane, it's important to note, obviously continues through the corridor, defined 5 feet in width, heading southbound. And then really northbound, since we've kind of lost that sidewalk at Dirigo through that crosswalk, we're not continuing a sidewalk on the easterly side. So your conditions there are basically as they exist today. So you're really just talking about striping. Which in turn, if you have a defined 11-foot travel lane, you've got a variable width bike lane, but we've ensured that that's 5 feet minimum. Continuing to the north, exact same cross section, reconstruction of sidewalk on the westerly side, 11-foot travel lanes, bike lanes in either direction. This is where it starts to get a little interesting. Again, kind of continuing up to Gilbert Street, the cross section's exactly the same, 11-foot travel lanes. Bike lane gets a little bit wider, 5.5 feet, but for all intents and purposes, dedicated bike lanes both directions, reconstructed sidewalk on the westerly side. We had a lot of talk about this. So in the area of Gilbert Street, I'm sure you guys are familiar with this. There was a lot of talk about providing a crosswalk somewhere on this corridor. There was a lot of need identified for it. We looked at providing a crosswalk not at the intersection of Gilbert, but moving it towards Island Ave. The concern there, for those of you that are familiar with the road, is you have a pretty significant crest curve, vertical curve in the road that has the potential to restrict sight distance. So to us, that did not seem like a great location to put a crosswalk across Main Street, which is what's the driver for it being at Gilbert Street. So again, that's why that's located where it is. The other element of note where you see a lot of line work happening is in the area of this convenience store. Again, for those of you that are familiar, that's kind of a sea of pavement. So one of the recommendations that came out of both the, well, mostly out of the Heads Up program, but certainly was talked about at the advisory committee level, was the need for access management in this area. This will obviously, involve Rob and, the town of Orono and kind of communicating with the property owner, kind of seeing what's possible here. But to us, from a traffic engineering perspective, especially given the location of these side streets, it seems like a pretty dangerous condition, not only for vehicles going in and out of the convenience store, but also for pedestrians that choose to walk here. So we're looking at new sidewalk on that side to define those access points. So Island Ave's kind of cut off. So Island Ave's to my left. Again, we're kind of continuing to the north. Curb line is being pushed towards the center line a little bit. So the new sidewalks being constructed on the easterly side of the road. So by push towards the center line, the width of Main Street curb to curb gets a little narrower. Again, benefit from that is both from a traffic calming standpoint and provides us a little more pedestrian space if needed. But again, 11-foot travel lanes, which are 100% within the standard with dedicated striped bike lanes in either direction. Moving to the north, you start to see that we have a lot of width available to us here, just the existing curb to curb. So there were a number of options we looked at in this area. Number one was to consider continuing the cross section that I spoke of earlier with 11-foot travel lanes and a 5-foot bike lane. In doing that, that would involve us pulling the curb again towards the road and narrowing it. That proved to be pretty cost prohibitive, both from a construction standpoint and mostly from a drainage perspective. So we thought there was a benefit here of changing the striping a little bit, because striping is pretty cheap money in the grand scheme of things, and providing a dedicated 2-foot buffer. So what that would be is a 2-foot stripe buffer. So that bike lane is a pseudo really 7 feet from the fog line or edge of travel way to the curb line. And then there's that buffer in there again to try to separate bicyclists from moving vehicles. You'll also see another element of note on the easterly side of Main Street as you get towards Spencer Street. Sidewalk gets a little wider, it's about 8 feet wide. And then we are proposing another crosswalk, similar treatment with an RFB in the vicinity of Spencer Street. Again, similar cross section, nothing to really talk about here. 2-foot buffer, 5-foot bike lanes. You start to see, and probably the next slide is a little better representation of this, around station 153, where that gray gets a little darker. That's where we're proposing a mill and overlay. So all of these treatments, and I'm sure if I mentioned this before, what we're proposing from this area south is the core of the road really is not going to be repaved. It's not going to be mill and overlay. It's not going to be reclaimed. So you're really just talking a striping exercise from curb to curb, and then obviously providing your pedestrian infrastructure. The method of construction starts to change as we get to the north of 153, as you'll see here. So a lot going on with this plan. Westwood Drive, so obviously in the vicinity of the school. Lot of discussion in this area. The need for the mill and overlay, in our opinion, and it's probably incredibly difficult for you guys to see it, but there's a lightly dashed gray line which represents the existing center of the road today. So in order for us to create enough space to accommodate both vehicles in the road, dedicated bike lanes, and sidewalks, we had to shift the center line to the westerly side, or towards the west, I should say, by a couple feet. What ends up happening is the crown of the road then ends up being in more or less the middle of that proposed travel way, which is why we're proposing to mill and overlay it to move the crown of the road to that new proposed center line. So that's
Brad,
yeah.
Sorry,
No, you're good.
what's a mill and overlay? Like you're just repaving over?
Yeah, so
or
when we say mill and overlay, you know, the depth could be variable. I'm not sure what Rob prefers, but for sake of
So
discussion.
let me clarify that. So when we say mill, we're talking about actually coming in and grinding the surface of the pavement away, okay? And the reason we need to grind it away is because we're changing the way the pitch of the road is, the crown of the road is constructed. Roads are crowned, of course, at the center, and you need that center line to be the middle of the two travel lanes, so we can primarily it's for winter maintenance, so that we can effectively plow the roads without having to fight the changes of grade with the crown. So moving the
That's good.
center line is the reason why we need to do the mill.
Thank you.
So construction aside, some of the elements here real quick is the crosswalk at RSU 26 Westwood Drive. You'll see a crosswalk provided there. You'll also see one element. This is what we call a curb bump out or curb extension. So rather than continuing the curb line where you see it to the north, we're actually bumping that curb line out. That primarily is to provide visibility for pedestrians, for motorists to both see pedestrians and pedestrians to see vehicles. The other item that does is that really shrinks the shoulder width a little bit more than what's there today. One issue that was identified to us from Meredith was, and many of you have probably seen this, is turning traffic in the morning heading towards a school, people waiting to make a left. People sometimes will pass that traffic, that stop waiting to make a left on the right. Well, unfortunately, that's in direct conflict with students crossing the road as well. So we're trying to eliminate that conflict point. Moving to the north, you'll see some on-street parking. The one thing that's obvious here for those of you that are familiar is there's an abundance of parking here today. We need to use some of that on-street parking to create what we have here. So there is a loss of parking on this corridor to provide these improvements. And I can certainly answer some more questions on that once I finish up, because I'm sure there will be some. Moving to the north, you'll see center median islands, 2 center median islands. Again, part of that is to try to change up the look of the corridor from a traffic calming perspective. Again, both of those would be provided with RFBs, provide median refuge areas. And again, the idea is to try to slow traffic down in this area to provide them a different visual as they head towards downtown, or frankly, as they're leaving downtown. Once again, mill and overlay continues. We've got another crosswalk provided to the south of Goodridge Drive. You'll also notice there's a call out to the south. And again, some of this is happening in phase 1, but a majority is actually happening in a future phase. The bus shelter that many of you know that is located at Pine Street towards the signal. We're actually proposing to move it to this location. Number of reasons for that. Number one is there were some observations. There's a number of conflicts depending on time of day with buses pulling off and the signal backing up. Also, there's not really a safe crossing there. We realized there used to be a crosswalk there. There's obviously some reasons that got removed. We think this is better for a number of reasons. It provides that safer crossing. It provides a bus pullout. If the bus, if transit finds that to be a need, we can provide that. Also provides access management at the bank. They've got a number of access points both on Main Street and on Goodridge Drive. So again, we're trying to define that pedestrian space on Main Street with the idea that they get more or less one curb cut on Main Street and one off Goodridge. Heading towards the signals, again, not a lot to talk about here. We're pretty well confined in what we can do, just given the condition of everything. There's overly wide sidewalk there today, but again, we're proposing to rebuild all of that. It's concrete today. We'd be putting concrete back. Again, even though Bennick Road was talked about being realigned, that doesn't really fit within the scope of work. The one item we're looking to do here, actually I should go back real quick. You'll see as you get to the north of Goodridge Drive, heading northbound, that dedicated bike lane turns into a shared lane with vehicles, and that shared lane kind of continues towards the bridge. And again, that's just a function of the available width we have. So travel lanes are being narrowed to 10.5 feet, southbound direction, bike lanes being provided. It's at a minimum width of 4 feet. We're doing everything we can to squeeze it in there. The idea for the dedicated bike lane in one direction over the other is really traffic or bicyclists that are heading southbound. There's a pretty significant grade, as all of you know, and those bicyclists that choose to ride in the road that are in the travel lane, it's going to take them a while to get up to speed. So providing them their own space in that direction certainly is preferential over providing it in the northbound direction.
Brad, sorry, can I interject one more time on that?
Absolutely. Yeah, you're fine.
The dotted white line is the intention for the bikes going up the hill there.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I should have spoken to that.
Is that going to be painted, or is that just for us to see where it is?
That would be painted.
Oh, okay. All right, great. Thank you.
And there's a number of treatments for that. Right now, it's just white dash. Some communities will do green paint in there to really differentiate it in the middle of intersections. But yeah, that's just striping. Yep. The last element of the project here that I skipped over is another crosswalk in the vicinity of Marsh Island and near the trail network there. So we're providing a new crosswalk with RFBs in that vicinity.
And that replaces the awkward, long one that's on a skew that comes out there from Oak Street.
I'm really gonna skip this slide because I covered a lot of it. This just covers some of the goals of the project. I think we've kind of beat that to death here. Again, it's providing the pedestrian space, dedicated bike lanes, getting the corridor up to compliance for ADA and traffic calming. So that plan I just presented to you, that's like the overall plan. And I always hesitate to give numbers at this juncture because it's all a function of when a project gets built and there's a number of factors at play. But high level estimate to do that work that you saw, that's magnitude of about a $2 million project.
And I'll say at this point, council's allocated about 500,000 to this project. And we've been able to get some funding through the Heads Up program that builds our budget to roughly around 650.
So with that in mind, yep, sorry, go ahead, Rob.
Obviously, we had to think of ways that we could step back and prioritize elements of the full build out to fit our budget to get the most impact, the most positive impact as quick as we could with the funding that we had available. So Brad and I worked through all the elements that were there and have come up with this solution to try to prioritize what elements of the build out could be done without necessarily compromising the full build out, thinking that could be done in future phases as we move through the years.
Right. So with that in mind, this phase one plan really keeps that budget in mind, that $500,000 to $600,000. So we're taking elements of that overall plan, implementing them, and the elements really are focusing on the crosswalk locations that you saw. So it's really being thoughtful about the crosswalks we're putting in place, rebuilding the sidewalks that you see here. Again, scope of work's exactly the same as what you saw in the overall plan. It's just a section of that plan is being implemented in phase one. So we've been really careful to make sure that what's being done in phase one, if the overall master plan was to move forward, isn't at risk of being rebuilt, if that makes sense. So we're really keeping an eye towards that. So you'll see some elements, maybe you're asking a question, well, why didn't you continue sidewalk down a certain area? Well, it's, either we have to move the center line or it was just cost prohibitive to try to keep within that 500,000 to 600,000 range. So again, what we propose, all those improvements in the vicinity of Gilbert Street, that crosswalk, that access management would be done. Continuing to the north, that sidewalk we're providing on the easterly side of the road and moving that curb in to try to narrow the road a little bit would be provided. Continuing up to Spencer Street, again, not a lot happening there, but provide that crosswalk, get that sidewalk treatment in there, get that all up to ADA compliance, that would be completed. Continuing up towards the school, we thought it was very important that we focus on this area since, again, the Heads Up program identified this area as priority number 1 for Orono as a whole. And we had a lot of information to go off of both on that and the downtown study. So again, you'll see that crosswalk treatment we spoke of earlier would be provided. Center median islands, both for traffic calming and pedestrian refuge, would be provided as well. Working up towards Goodridge, again, some of that access management, if we can get to an agreement with the owner of that parcel that we move forward, that would be conducted. The bus shelter, the bus pull-off, that would be constructed. One element I didn't mention, it's a really minor detail, but Goodridge Drive, you see the center of your screen, the fire station is just to the north of that. Access management was talked about. Obviously, we don't want to restrict fire trucks going in and out of there or any other emergency vehicles, so there would just be a concrete band differentiating, again, the vehicular space from the pedestrian space, but it would be completely rideable. Traffic can go right over it, but just provides that visual barrier between the two. So it really goes from Goodrich, and then Sebago will work with Rob and his group on some signal improvements, implementing the LPI that I spoke of earlier. We think that's important. That's not really shown on this plan because it's not necessarily a quote unquote infrastructure improvement. It's a signal timing adjustment. So really the next thing would be providing the crosswalk down towards Marsh Island, as we talked about with the RFBs. So important to note, phase one, there really wouldn't be any dedicated bike lanes striped at this time because the corridor width would be inconsistent. So it's really phase one focuses on crosswalk locations, crosswalk treatments, and then at those crosswalk locations, providing the RFBs. With that being said, there's a lot there. I appreciate your patience. Be happy to open up to discussion.
So does anybody have anything for Brad?
Oops, I'm sorry. I realized my video was off here. Sorry about that.
So I think something I wanted to emphasize is that while we knew that the project, the overall build was obviously going to exceed our allocated funds, we felt like it was important to work with the advisory committee to create a full build out concept so that we wouldn't be making improvements in one area without thought of how that would work and how that would fit in with the other pieces of the puzzle. So yes, the budget for the full build out is extensive. But we feel like prioritizing the pedestrian crossings and getting those ADA improvements taken care of as soon as we can has got to be the priority for the phase one work. And then obviously keep digging for funds that, we've got another application in with, at this time, with the Senate budget process to try to perhaps get this thing funded. But obviously we'll have to get a little creative with our funding sources as we move forward. But I think this is kind of the best we can do with given the resources we've been allocated.
Yeah. Can I say too that as you're talking, as Brad is talking, I'm thinking about transportation and walkability and lowering greenhouse gas emissions and having bike lanes and sidewalks as part of that climate plan. So there might be some funding with a shovel-ready project like this coming. So I can see this fitting in with decreasing our carbon footprint even. So I think environmentally it's even it's a good start. So yeah, so I was kind of thinking about that kind of moving in that direction as well. So yeah.
One of the things, I'm sorry, I thought you were, one of the things we heard loud and clear from the advisory committee was that they, they wanted to use that complete streets approach and not necessarily prioritize vehicles over cars, vehicles over bikes over pedestrians. And, some of the traffic calming, the median islands are not the most convenient thing to have to drive through, but it really elevates the level of awareness for the pedestrians and bikes that will be in that corridor at the same time, and provides more shared space than prioritizing a large portion of it to the vehicular traffic. One of the things that you'll note is that does prioritize some of the pedestrian and bike elements of the project, eliminate parking areas. So that was something that I kind of wanted to take your temperature on and make sure that as we moved forward with that, it would be something council would support.
Rob, can you be more specific on exactly what part of Main Street you would eliminate parking?
Yeah, it'd probably be helpful if I pull up that plan again, and then I can talk.
In phase one, to make the pedestrian improvements, there would just be a few areas. So right now, we don't have dedicated bike lanes, nor do we have parking area. We don't have dedicated parking either. So it's sort of just a free for all on that shared shoulder area. The full build out, you'll notice, shows dedicated parking spaces in areas where they're appropriate. And they're primarily on the, what would be the east side of Main Street. And they eliminate, how many did we end up with, Brad? 10?
In the final condition,
Yeah,
yeah, we had 9.
9, yeah.
Yeah.
Where now I think if you lined up the cars on Main Street, ignoring crosswalks and driveways, you can get 15 or 20 in there right now. So, but by doing that, those parked cars create some pretty unsafe circumstances that this project's working to address.
Any other questions people have?
Well,
Yep.
I had a comment. We heard several weeks ago from our community transit partners about the relocation of some of their bus stops, potential relocation in the future. And I was just wondering if Rob could speak to whether there's been any communication with them or how we would adapt to them putting in different stops.
Yeah, so I'm part of that group that's working on that. So I've been talking to myself a lot. So no, but yeah, no, that will be part of the discussion. Will be that it's going to be coming up soon. We'll be talking about working in on the selection process of where the bus stops will go, but the location that we relocated to will work for that.
Laura?
I just had some questions about the Goodridge Drive intersection because of a recent pedestrian incident there. And I understand that things were different in the last year with the construction at the schools, but there was a lot of traffic backed up into Main Street from Asa Adams. And my understanding is that it's always been an issue there. And so regardless of phasing, we're not doing a ton at that intersection. Do we feel like we are effectively addressing like a really comparatively heavily used intersection compared to some of the others that we're doing?
I would say we're probably doing more at Goodrich than any other intersection in the project in phase 1. We're adding that extra crosswalk, which will have rapid flashing beacons. So it'll have that press button option for pedestrians to walk across on the Main Street side. We've added so right now it's just a striped line on the corner of, on the fire station side. And that we're adding that flush curb there. So that will create a little bit better of a refuge for pedestrians too. So there's quite a bit going on right there.
So okay, all right.
Anybody else have questions, comments? Well, first and foremost for me, Brad, thank you so much for doing this. I also want to just kind of like, I wasn't nearly as engaged as Rob, and I tell you that when I was in a meeting with the citizens really thought this through. I mean, and I'm a bit more partial to I'm a biker, so I've gotten more and more into it, and I get concerned about getting hit a lot. So these little things, and to listen to citizens that have the same kind of concerns, because we are a community that's a pretty healthy community. So Rob, thank you, because I think you've done an amazing job with this. And I think the people that you had on the committee were amazing. And I get why the whole thing is created as a whole, and you pick away at it. I mean, we'll get there. It's not going to happen overnight. But I want the councilors to know that you were pretty amazing and committed to making sure that this process is getting through. So thank you. Any more thoughts, questions before I let Brad go?
So I just, as our next steps, if the committee is saying, go ahead and move forward with the design of what we've shown you tonight, I'll begin to communicate with members of the affected properties to try to work out some of those access management issues. I'll also be beginning to talk with some other interested members of the community on the corridor to give them some information about what the project's going to look like. And then Brad's going to get to work on making this project a reality. I will say, and my goal has always been to get something built this summer, but seeing the way this construction season is going, I'm not 100% possible that that's going to be feasible. I know that we're struggling to get bidders on some of our really big projects, and this one isn't necessarily a bigger project, so that might be good, it might be bad. I guess, depending on how quickly Brad can turn around his plans and specifications for the project, we're going to try and get everything we can done within this season, but also know that Orono kind of turns into a pumpkin on Main Street in September. So we're really kind of running out of time. And so that's our goal is to move this thing forward as quickly as we can. But I'm not 100% sure we're going to be able to get anything in the ground this year. But of course, we'll keep you abreast of that situation.
I think you're in a tough situation, but you handle it well, Rob. You always do. So I'm in favor of moving forward if the other counselors are also in favor. And it seems like we all are. So yes, Rob, I think we should just proceed forward.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
You
Thank you
too.
for your time, everyone. Nice meeting you.
Brad.
Thanks.
So we'll move on to item number 5, review of RSU director candidates and discussion of next steps regarding appointment process. So Sophie, am I handing this off to you, or how are we doing this?
I'd be happy to kind of just bring you guys up to speed. The town received notice in early June that Aaron Ellis, who had been elected to serve on the school board, had been a school board member, resigned unexpectedly, and which left a vacancy effective immediately. And it is the town council's responsibility under state law to fill that vacancy through an appointment through the next annual municipal election. So not till November, but until March, when we have our annual municipal election. There is no requirement in state law as to how you do it. There is no right or wrong way for this process. In the past, council has asked staff to advertise the vacancy, taken the candidates, reviewed them briefly, and then scheduled interviews for an opportunity for candidates to come in and talk with the entire council, and then essentially referred a name on to the town council. My understanding is there's been some communication between the council chair, the chairs of both the RSU and the council about the need for us to try to seat somebody by August, if possible, to allow for, I think, back to school planning and important things like that. So there is no specific process other than ultimately the entire council has to take an official vote to appoint an individual. And I am here to be your administrative support to make that happen.
Laura?
Can we get an update on like how many people have applied and where kind of the status of things?
Sure. So we advertised starting on June 4th. The application period closed at 2:00 yesterday. We had 3 applicants. We had Thomas T.J. Herlihy, Elizabeth Beth Huffnagel, and Leo Kenny have applied. The information that they submitted was provided to town council and is available on the website as part of this committee packet.
People have questions? Any questions? Sophie, I do have a question, and I'm gonna gingerly walk around this to say, so I'm gonna be saying it right. Could you help me understand what is the actual, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to say this. So if I get 2 emails, one of which somebody has an opposition based on you don't win, and somebody has, there's a rule that says you must, can you kind of get me up to speed? Is there a rule? I don't know about this. There is no rule.
So council's selection of this individual is based upon what council determines is in the best interest of the town in this moment in time. There are lots of ways that you can consider information, and you are not required to consider in either way. So what we're talking about, let's be completely transparent. What we're talking about is the idea that if somebody ran for election and was not voted in, does council have to take that into consideration? And you can decide you do, you can decide you don't, you can decide it means something positive, or you can decide it means something negative. That is your determination, and you guys need to work through that process.
Excuse me. I think the question comes up because in ancient history, when I was working in the school department and we occasionally had a resignation on the school committee, the town council at that time, we're now talking 20 years ago, had a routine of going to the last municipal election, and if there was a candidate that ran for the position that was not elected, they frequently appointed that candidate. That was before any of us were on the council, and obviously procedures have changed since then.
So Tom, I'd like to ask though, that would be, and once again, I'm gonna gingerly walk around this, is that given the candidates that we've had for, I'm just using the council as an example, and a counselor leaves and we go back to somebody that probably wasn't the best counselor choice, that I guess that thought doesn't really resonate well in my head, because that person could be totally not the right choice and we're going to forego somebody who's amazing. So that's why I'm kind of asking the question. Laura?
Yeah, I mean, I think this came before it was a council meeting, right, Sophie, when you first announced this? That, yeah, so it was a full council meeting. It was announced that we had a school board member leaving. We decided to put it out for, the community to apply. So I feel like we've walked down a process, and now our process is to interview. Like, we have applicants, we interview them. So we're past the point of figuring out a process. Like, we have a process already. So to me, like, we need to interview, and then we decide who we decide to pick. Like, that's a different conversation. But that's just my perspective.
Oh, and that's the process that we've used in the last 2 or 3 appointments when we had a resignation. So that's no different than what we've previously done.
I support that process.
Yeah, I was going to say, Laura, I agree with everything that you're saying, except for the caveat that we decided on a process when we had the announcement go out. When we had a call for applications, at that point, we had decided on a process, whether we were consciously doing that or not. I agree. Like, we asked the public to apply. We had already decided on the process at that point. The public would apply and we would review the applications. And that's what we've done for the past several vacancies. I think we have 3 great candidates, so I'm happy to review their applications and do interviews.
Jeff, do you have thoughts?
I'm happy doing the interviews. In fact, I was appointed once to that committee through the interview process, so I think it's fair and it can work out well. I personally wouldn't put weight on an election whose results were this close. It's not like the election was a repudiation of a particular, it's not like this particular election was a repudiation of a particular candidate. So I think the interviews are in fact particularly important.
Great, thank you.
I'd like to speak. I think that I agree with Councillor Gardner that we created a process when we made a call for people to apply for the position. And I am impressed with the resumes of the candidates that sent us their interest in being doing this service. And I think that we should continue by interviewing them and moving forward. And the fact that one of them, sorry, excuse me, the fact that one of them applied, or excuse me, was a candidate is a fabulous thing. That's just, and has already served, just shows that how important it is to that candidate. But that's the process, is that that's just one of the things that we know about the people who are applying. So there's my 2 cents.
Look, I think we're in agreement on the process. I think the challenge is let's figure out some dates, and if we're going to have somebody appointed by August, don't we have to have a recommendation for our July meeting?
Sophie?
Yes, so the answer is kind of, if you're gonna follow your schedule, yes. There's nothing that would stop you from holding a special council meeting if you needed time in mid-July to be able to come together. We've done that before. We've made appointments like this to meet deadlines. But council might consider, we're having, I don't know if June 24th might work, or if we could pick some dates through a doodle, see what works for the candidates and try to line them up. I don't know if you want to do these in person or on Zoom. I'd just like some feedback from the group.
Laura?
Do we have an idea how long our 21st and because we're meeting on the 21st and the 28th, right? Are those agendas really long?
Yeah, the 28th agenda is very long. The 21st agenda, we were not planning to air that meeting. It was a workshop, and our plan was to try to do some internal hybrid testing at that meeting.
So couldn't we just show the part that was the interviews?
We can, we probably would be using technology like we used to use, which would be like streamed on, not high def. It would not look like this. You wouldn't see people's faces. It would look like what we used to use in order to stream it out of council chambers, is my guess.
So we did decide, though, we wouldn't go live like in person until July, right?
So what we decided was that staff needed a dry run,
Right.
and that the workshop on Monday seemed like a good time to try that out, because in the past, workshops weren't public, weren't streamed. They were, sometimes we didn't even have audio from workshops. They were, if people wanted to come and sit and watch, they could. I don't know how you feel about these interviews, if you want the community to be able to see them, or if you want to say, if it's important, come to the council meeting. That's up to you.
Does anybody have thoughts about how you think it would look?
So if you mentioned the 24th, is a possibility. And there's nothing scheduled for the 24th at this point.
I can't do the 24th. I would love to do it on the 21st, but that again, and the technology doesn't seem critical to me. I also don't, does it have to be televised? Like, yeah, then, but somebody could show up at council chambers. I'm comfortable with that.
As far as scheduling, I wouldn't be able to make it on the 24th until 6 o'clock.
24th wouldn't work for me either.
So, Sophie, this is getting fun. So,
We,
do we have any? I mean, we may have to do a special thing.
so if you wanted to, we could look at July 1st
Okay.
or July 8th,
Let's see.
which would get us something in time for the 12th, which would mean we could make the appointment at a regular council meeting.
July 1st works for me if it works for everybody else.
I may be out of town on the 1st, but I will be here on the 8th.
First
Oh,
would
it's
be better for
24th
me than
again.
the 8th.
Okay.
I'm going to be out of town on the 8th.
Have we given up on the 21st?
Yeah, I was still hoping for the 21st personally.
Sophie, what are the government mask rules if we meet on the 21st and people show up? Do they show up?
So
Vaccination, I mean, is there any kind of a
and
mask?
understand the town is its own, this is our property.
Okay.
And so what we have done at this point, because it still kind of jives with the executive orders, is we've said, if you come to town hall, if you haven't been vaccinated, wear a mask. And if you have, you don't need to. I will also say that we are not carding people as they come in. It is an honor system setup. So if it's important to you to have a mask, you should wear a mask.
Okay. I'm okay with the 21st if we have.
So is it? I'm I'm up north the 21st. So can I still do it remotely? You think? Would I be a good test person?
Yeah, I think that would be a great test. Our idea though would be not to put it out to the world because it's gonna
Right.
look as long as you're patient, Terry. If
I
you're
am
patient
both
with us,
patient.
we'll make it work.
I will be very patient.
So,
So it's just, Meg, was that this thing that you said you were available at 6? Or are you on that day, or
Oh,
was it?
No, I'm
No.
fine on the 21st.
Okay.
So-
So go ahead. Sorry.
no, I'm gonna ask another question. So you finish up, Terry.
Okay, so we're all good with 6/21, June 21st, next Monday, the next Monday, 5 o'clock.
And except for Terry, we will be at the town hall.
I might even have a snack or something for you.
Of course, now you get the snacks.
And will
oh,
you,
go ahead.
we've had some questions, so we're careful to ask each candidate the same kind of thing. Will you get some questions out for us?
I would be happy to do that, to get you some questions. What would be kind of helpful to me is if you have some thoughts about what would be important for you to ask, if you want to just shoot me an email. Those questions probably won't, given my schedule, probably will go out Saturday or Sunday morning. So you have some time to get the emails to me. And then, Tom, would you like to see them first before they go out? That's fine. Oh, you're muted.
No, that's fine. I
Okay.
don't need to see them first.
All right, I can absolutely do that.
We could always make any adjustments at the last minute if we really felt we needed to.
So my plan would be to have Nancy get in touch with people tomorrow morning to see if they're available. Would we accept if somebody was, for example, off traveling, would we say, go ahead and try to Zoom in and we'll try to make the technology work?
Yes, I
Could
think
just
so.
be another test, right? An adventure. Okay, we can absolutely make this happen. If anything changes, I'll make sure to let you let you know, but I'll expect to see people here at 5 o'clock on the 21st. Bell is not going to be here on the 28th. So we're back 100% on Zoom on the 28th because I can manage that. I'm not going to manage 5 pieces of technology. That's outside of my brain width. Okay.
Great. Sophie, did you say you had one more item before we go over to town managers?
Actually, it is the town managers. So I think we're,
Okay.
Sure. Oh, go ahead.
Nope, you're good. Go.
Okay. So you and Cheryl have kind of been working behind the scenes to bump the climate action planning
We are.
for
We're going to move that forward. Yep.
next
Cheryl's
month.
been
Okay.
gracious to do that.
I'm hungry.
Yeah. But I don't want to take a lot of time, and we're at a point where I am probably going to just give you a written report in the next 5. I'm going to say within the next week, I'll get you a written report. But I do want to bring a couple things to your attention. First is that the auditor was here for the pre-audit. Everybody left early because they could get things done so quickly, which I love to hear. We know that the full audit's going to happen in September, and we've been told it's probably going to be a hybrid of a couple of days here and a few days remote. So normally Tom would meet with the auditor when they're here. So I'll just let you know when that's going to be, and we'll make that happen. The second thing is Mitch Stone is waiting in the wings, and I really want to take my time and pass it over to him because he is shepherding the assessing department these days. And I don't know if anybody's heard, but we're in the midst of a reval. And I wanted him to just give you a brief update. On the 28th, one of the items that we have is our town assessor is going to Zoom in and talk to you with assessor language about what's happening. But I'm hoping Mitch can, in just a few minutes, kind of give you the lay of the land.
So I'm extremely excited to be talking about the reval this evening. I'm sure you've all heard that's happening, and I will say I am not an expert on assessing, nor am I on revals. What I am an expert on or have become is working with Vision through the process and understanding what the process is. And I think what I want to start with, and I know Sophie has said this, and I know you've probably said it to other people, is that right now we are in a kind of a critical stage of where people have gotten information, and the need is for feedback on that information, and it's part of the process. So this whole idea of setting informal interviews with Vision is extremely important. Normally during revals, folks will go through people's homes and actually have meetings with them, but during COVID, that wasn't possible. So they reached out through mail and other ways to try to get that information, and frankly, probably didn't get a lot of information back. So this is really the first opportunity a lot of our property owners have to kind of look at what they've put on paper, and they've done their best with what was there before and maybe some other stuff to try to figure out how to value that home. So this is why it's important. And I know I've heard some anecdotal stories from some of you folks that have found mistakes with what's there. And that's why it's important, because that's part of this process, is now the opportunity to discuss it, fix these little bugs that are there, and try to correct those things now. That process is happening currently. You can sign up for those informal things till the 25th. The last interviews are on the 30th, and then in July, once they have those interviews, they will send out a kind of a summary of that, what might have changed in that. After that process is done, the next step is if people aren't happy with the answer they got, how that worked, then they would reach out to the assessor, okay? And at that point, then the assessor would work through those things. We kind of have time, and that's the good news about this, is that these values are where you work with folks before commitment. Okay. Once commitment hits, that changes things, because it becomes formal at commitment, and then the process becomes formal after commitment. So now is the time for folks to really discuss this the best they can with with Vision first, because they're the one that did the reval, then with our assessor if there are still things that feel like they're outstanding. Some things to remember: it's been a long time since we've revaled. So, since this has happened, which is causing that kind of shock to some people that have seen values go up more than they may have expected. But I also think these are all based on the way that they do things and based on comparable sales and things like that. So I think it's really important that I can't say it enough. Please call Vision, get an appointment. And if you need help with that, everything is on the website as far as instructions are concerned. There's a big orange box. Click on the big orange box and it tells you exactly how to go through that process. If there's a challenge with that, please call the office. Jess, the administrative assistant, has been fabulous. She has fielded numerous calls, and I might consider an expert at taking these calls now and directing people to the right place. So we want to help through this process, and I know that it feels challenging because some folks, this may be the first time they feel like they've seen anything. So certainly we encourage everybody to participate in this way.
So I fielded a few phone calls and a few emails, and I know counselors have gotten a few emails, and I'm sure you're going to get stopped when you're at the grocery store. But I think there are a couple of places that people are getting hung up. One is around the percent increase, whether it's fair or not. It's not about the shift in amount. It's about what the end value is. If they don't think the end value is fair, they absolutely should go through the process of the informal hearing. If they think the end value is just fine, but they don't like the fact that it's 50% higher than it was last year, there really is not much that we can do. The Constitution of the state tells us that we're supposed to be assessing at fair market value. And so I can't say this person's fair market value is 20% more than last year and this one's 50% more. So we'll roll in only 50%. Only 20%. You're either going to bring everybody up on the same cost schedule or you're not. So people, I think, have had some concern about that. The other place that people, even though it says it in the letter, I think it's that they can't get over the shock and get far enough through the letter, is that the value does not include any exemptions and should not be taken against this year's mill rate and to determine your tax rate. It should not be taken against the projected mill rate, because I did not roll all the value in, because what I didn't want to do is offer a projected mill rate for FY22 that was lower than the actual, because then everybody would have been really upset. And I wanted to give the opportunity, in case we had made a mistake, to allow the assessors to not run into having to tell me that I have projected too much value. So that.
And Sophie, I think you talked to that about how this was unique in our budgeting process, that it wasn't going to be final for longer. So that's part of it too. Thank you.
Welcome. So I want to take the heat off council as much as I can, because the other thing that's really important for everybody to understand is that council does not have a role in determining value, which is why when you get people wanting to talk to you about it, the answer is you really need to go through the vision process. If you talk to anybody that is having difficulty either getting an appointment or they're not happy with the service they got during the appointment, or they're just unhappy about anything other than their assessment, please send them to me or to Mitch, because we are prepared and have been walking people through this process.
So Sophie, can I ask, how long has it been since the last assessment?
The last assessment it uses 1990 cost schedule, so it's been 31 years.
And the only thing that, if we want to talk about percentages, I was the person in that category is 65%. Who would have thought the tough end was gonna be all that's trendy? I love it. But I am a person who can, I get it, and I could, but the only thing I worried about was the individuals who really do live in a weird, it's like they have their means and stuff like that. And this all of a sudden there's a jump. So it leads me to the question of going forward, is there something in place that says that we're not gonna be waiting 30 years? Are we putting something in place to make sure that these revals are being done in a timely manner so people don't get this shock this many years later? I mean, and trust me, I'm the person that said, like, I feel like even me as a property owner, I benefited from low taxes for the longest time, I guess. But still, having said that, people live on budgets, and do we have anything in place for that going forward?
So I wish I could say every 10 years on the dot, we're going to do a reval. And the fact of the matter is revals are getting more and more expensive. Right now, if we put this out to bid, we would likely be well over $300,000 for a reval. So one of the things that we're doing with this reval, though, is we have collected data and have it inputted in an electronic way that even if this particular software isn't what we want or won't be used in the future, it is going to be importable into various softwares. That will also give our assessors the ability to, without having to go through the on-the-ground review, they will be able to continue to do cost analysis on a regular basis and update the cost schedules, which will then feed into the data that is in place for each property. Am I making sense? Because we did the pickup work before. We did we had the analysis by the state every year that said that we were right around 100% of sales ratio, which is where you want to be, and our quality rating, which they looked at assessed value to sale. Our quality rating came in right where we would want to see it. The issue is that we're putting in, we did not have the data collected to be able to manipulate the sales, the cost schedules the right way. And the other thing that we have gotten questions about, Terry, just so people are aware, is when Mitch worked with Vision, they had significant conversation about when to kind of take the sales data, because what we don't want is all of our sales data to be coming from this very, very hot market and end up bursting and falling back down. Right, Mitch?
Yeah, the other thing I would add, Terry, is in talking to Mark, our new assessor, typically because of the length of time, we had to do a total town reval, which is expensive. And typically what happens is after periods of time, they will start to take sections of the town and kind of go through them and do mini revals to kind of reset to make sure that they're hitting that as well. So do a little bit more in depth than just the cost scheduling. That doesn't put us as far behind in finding those things. So I think those kind of things put together will kind of give us a way to make sure that we're not getting so far behind like we had in this case.
No, that makes sense. Jeff, I cut you off. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, thanks. I was just going to say, I appreciate what Mitch and Sophie were saying about participating in the less formal meetings with Vision, because I had one particular comment from somebody I bumped into the other day who really thought this was an adversarial process, and they were, worried whether they'd have to bring a lawyer, and they were, and I said, have the conversation first, and go through the process. So I think the more we can help people through the process, the better that's going to be in the long run. So if there's any misinformation out there about that, let's talk to people and get them on board with that.
Laura?
Do you have a sense for what year year the sales data that the market value they're using? Like if it's not 2020 or 2021, what is it?
So I know they look at 2 years and they look at one, typically they don't go past 2 years ago from the time in which they had taken that, and understanding that April 1st of 21 would have been that drop dead, because that's when the rate is set. So 2 years back from that, and they also look at 1 year sales, and they were trying to do that to make sure that there wasn't that skew. Is if we only took the 1 year, what does it look like, versus the 2 year, what does it look like? And we had long conversations about that, and I learned a lot. Just FYI.
And also, I think what Sophie said about going back into that website, even if you're not particularly concerned, there was some inaccurate information that we found. Like they said that we had central air, which I would have loved. But the only central air we have is open windows.
I was
So
going to say,
anyway.
I learned from our assessor that in Maine, central air is open windows.
Well, in that
No.
case, yes.
No, he was joking.
But anyway, but even just going back and just checking the information that they have, and after Mitch said, the virus, that made sense, because they really didn't have access to what was happening. So, and I don't think it was necessarily a guess, but yeah, some of the information was inaccurate. So it doesn't hurt to look and see what they were assessing, or the home that you're in.
Great. So anybody else have questions while we have Mitch and Sophie? No? Well, like I said, it's going to be one of those things that I definitely tell people to kind of follow the instructions on their stuff. And I was actually fortunate. I had an assessor who actually came by, and she sat there and talked through the process with me. Like, you have this. I said, well, I used to have 3 bedrooms, but I took a bedroom, turned it into a walk-in closet because it was too small. So I don't know how that goes on there, but yeah, mine. I was lucky. They actually talked with me. So anything else that we have to talk about on this one? No. Okay. So anything else, Sophie, in manager's update?
I really appreciate your patience tonight, and I'm going to be working after we get through the next couple of meetings at paring the agendas down, because this group likes to talk, and I will try to get us back into that 90 to 120 minutes if I can.
Would love it. All right, so nothing else to be said. Unless anybody has anything they want to say? No? Well, everybody go enjoy your evening and have something to eat, and we'll see you guys all soon.
We'll see you Monday.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.